Hey everybody, this is Modern Refugee. We are coming off of a power outage right now, and the power's back on. So I thought I'd take a few minutes to talk to you guys about a power outage protocol, things that I do when we have a unexpected power outage like this one was. Now, this wasn't related to a storm or anything; it was just a random power outage. And there's a few things that we do if something like that happens. Now, it's a little bit different if, we know bad weather's coming or something like that. But literally pulled in, power was out. So the first thing that I did is, of course, check my phone. The phone still worked, but we didn't receive much of a signal. And that's the first kind of clue that I thought this might be a more prolonged power outage, or it might be something a little bit more serious. Because typically, if we have a more localized power outage, our signal isn't affected for our electronics. So I pulled out the generator. I stage it. It's our generator back there. No fancy Generac for us. It's just a big portable generator that we've had for years and years that I've converted over to propane. I pulled that out. I got everything staged and ready to go. And then I jumped back in my truck and I took a drive around the neighborhood. Now, I've made it my business to know how the power comes into my area. So I know whether it's a localized, when I drive around and I look at the different area and people that are out of electricity, when I kind of judge that, I know whether or not it's a transmission line coming into this area, that there's some type of larger transmission issue, or if it's like a localized neighborhood power outage. So I took a drive around, probably about a mile and a half, and I judged that this was a larger power outage because everything was out. All the sort of indicators that I look for, because I know I make it my business to know, how many. There are certain things that run on certain circuits, and if you talk and you ask around, you can find that out in your neighborhood. And I judged that this was a larger power outage. So I said, okay, we're going to go back home. Came back home, hooked the generator into the house because it's not an automatic deal. Hooked the generator into the transfer switch in the house, and I switched everything over and fired everything up. And then the next thing that I did, this comes from the old timers. Whenever there was a power outage, the old timers, they would always grab a couple of dish pans, and they filled their dish pans up with water and put a little soap in one and left the other one clear. So if they needed to wash hands or do anything like that, they had water right handy, because a lot of the old timers, they had wells. So if the power went out, whatever you had in your well tank, that's all that you had. So they wanted to have some water there to wash and do small things. And because I deemed this was a little bit larger power outage, or something that I thought was going to last a little bit longer, there's no sense in firing up a bunch of stuff for cooking. It's summertime right now. We got plenty of stuff in the garden, so we pulled a few items out of the garden and decided we're just going to have some greens and salad for supper, which we did. And when we were eating, sort of the power fired back up and came back on. Now, this is another part of the protocol. Just because the power came back on doesn't necessarily mean that I trust that the power is going to stay on. Because there's been different times when I thought, if the power came back on, I start disconnecting things and then it goes back off again. So we don't when we fire everything up, we make sure that the power is going to stay back on before we disconnect everything. If you got a Generac and you got it hooked up to an automatic transfer switch, the machine does that for you, but we don't have that here, so we just basically do it ourselves. So we typically will wait at least an hour or two before we disconnect everything, so we know it's that the power's actually back on. And now the power has come back on here, but I'm actually going to do another drive around just to see once what things are in my neighborhood. If my local area here has power, everybody looks like they got, porch lights are on and everything sort of looks normal again, then I'll come back here and I'll start disconnecting things. So it's we look at each situation individually, and if the power goes out, we will kind of verify whether we think it's going to be something localized, because there's been times when the power was out, you go down half mile away and there's, a car accident, or there's a tree that fell over on something, because you had a little bit of wind or whatever. You can kind of judge, your neighborhood, or you should be able to judge your neighborhood what what the power outage is really caused by. And another thing too, the redundancy in the systems as far as like your internet and stuff. Sometimes you might not get a signal where you're at, but if you're out, you drive around a little bit, you'll get a signal on your phone. And most states have some type of power outage map. So then you can drive around a little bit and maybe drive a mile or two from your place, pop up on your phone, punch in one of the power outage maps for your area or your state, and then you can evaluate from that. And like I said, sometimes a particular tower will be out, or the generator at a particular cell phone tower won't kick in for that one, whatever. But if you drive around, you'll link up with another tower. So then that's a way that you can hop on the internet and you can kind of check out what's going on. We did try to texts. The texts sometimes will go through, sometimes they won't go through. Texts were kind of not really going through as well as I like, so I made a couple quick phone calls. Phone was working fine, but the texts weren't. It's usually the other way around, but those are just things that you want to check to verify to find out what's going on. But that's sort of our power outage protocol here. Some of the things that we do, we'll check out the area before we fire everything up to see if it's something that's going to be a little bit longer, or if we think it's going to be a little bit longer, then we'll fire everything up. We won't use any extra resources while this is going on. Like I said, we pulled some vegetables out of the garden. I actually fired up the fire pit, and that's another thing. I always have a box of small firewood for the fire pit, so we can cook or boil water. I don't have to worry about collecting any fuel. I pretty much keep that wood box filled at all times for that fire pit, and that's all that wood is used for. And we decided, we'll throw a couple of eggs in one of the bush pots, so we have a hard-boiled egg to go with our greens and our vegetables that we had out of our garden. And that's exactly what we did. And there's no sense in using the propane for the grill or one of the burners or anything if I've got a box full of firewood here already staged and ready to go. And that's another thing, if you got a charcoal grill or anything like that, I don't want to burn any of my propane until I absolutely have to. So if I want to cook something or boil water or heat something up, I'm going to do it with firewood because I've got all kinds of firewood. I don't have as much propane as I do firewood. So that's another thing that we did here while this whole thing was going on. And then when the power comes back on, we want to verify that it's going to actually stay on before we disconnect everything. And we want to verify our communications. Like I said, you might not get a signal where you're at because one particular tower or something is down for whatever reason, because of the power outage, because of a storm or whatever, but you might be able to hook into another one if you drive a mile or two away. And like I said, that quick drive around is really, really important to sort of evaluate the situation of what's going on in your area and sort of the seriousness of it. And communications is important. And the communications, the wireless communications that we all rely on, it's a fragile system, but it's like a road. There's potholes in it. There's places where it's smooth, and there's places where there's potholes, and it always pays to your benefit if you know all that stuff. So sort of know your communication networks and know how the power comes in. Everybody should take a drive around and look like where the transmission lines and stuff come into your area. You can always tell the transmission lines from the regular power lines are going to be a lot larger. They're usually going to flow into some type of substation, and then the power is going to be distributed from those substations. And that's another way that you can kind of check your area. But anyway, I just wanted to go over these little tips here on how to handle a power outage and how to evaluate whether or not a power outage is going to be something more prolonged or something more serious. Especially when there are outages like this, just a random outage, no storm, nothing seems to be particularly wrong, but these things happen. And in the day and age that we live in now, anything can happen at any time. But anyways, as a modern refugee, hope you guys got a little information and a little entertainment here out of my rambling, just talking about this power outage that we had here this afternoon. Anyway, you guys have a good one.